Hello, I am Dr. Marie Jarrell, and I'll be talking about my research on identification in video games and reducing societal biases. Now, my work is primarily focused on the psychological phenomenon of identification. It's a concept that exists in all types of media, from movies to books to music and more. The term is used to describe a wide variety of emotional experiences, but it is most commonly used to refer to the unique closeness you feel with a character. The idea that you feel connected to the character in some way, that you empathize with them, or see yourself in them. And this is also true for interactive media, such as fully immersive virtual reality experiences and video games. But there's more to it. Video games and other virtual interactive media are special because you don't just watch the characters in the story, you control them. And this produces a unique type of mental engagement with the stories, which changes just about everything in media analysis and is what excites me about this new frontier of entertainment, both as a fan and player and as a designer and researcher. This is embodied identification, and it represents not a feeling of connection through empathy with a character, but a feeling of connection from controlling a character and beginning to see them as an extension of your body and will. This unique connection between player and character can produce some astounding effects, such as temporarily changing a player's self-image, which in turn can lead to the player adopting properties of the character they play as. For example, one study found that when players identified with soldier characters in first-person shooter games, they reported feeling more brave, patriotic, and strong. Another study using fully immersive VR found that participants who were asked to control a virtual Albert Einstein not only felt smarter, but performed better on a cognitive test. Now, there was another finding from the Einstein study, and it was that participants who controlled the elderly Einstein VR avatar displayed less bias against elder adults. Another study using elderly avatars who were not famous theoretical scientists reported similar findings. Identifying with an elder adult avatar that a participant was controlling reduced biases against real-world elderly people. And this connection between identification with a virtual character and a reduction of bias against real-world populations has been supported in many other studies. Now, most of this research is limited in one way or another. First, there are studies that specifically use video games designed to reduce biases. These types of games are known as empathy or serious games, and they aim to educate players by incorporating narratives solely focused on combating societal biases and promoting advocacy, such as Gutierrez et al.'s work with Fair Play, an empathy game about the many systemical and unconscious biases Black graduate students face in predominantly white universities. The other major studies in embodied identification and bias reduction feature fully immersive VR body swapping experiences, which tell us more about how the experience of connecting with a character alone affects biases, but comes with its own setback. After all, playing a game in a fully immersive VR system like the Oculus Rift is a completely different cognitive experience from most standard video games, which are displayed on flat screens, like a computer or TV set. And since even something as small as playing from a first-person or third-person point of view can change how embodied identification operates, we can't just assume the findings from VR studies automatically apply to more standard gaming experiences. Furthermore, many of these studies only look at one aspect of identity. They may only research
say, gender bias or racial bias, and not look at how these two aspects of identity interact. Which is important because we know from intersectional theory research, the real world biases people face are actually an amalgamation of multiple aspects of their identity. So in my body of research, I wanted to begin to move away from this singular view of identity and slowly introduce an intersectional framework into identification and bias research. So rather than just looking at racial bias or gender bias, my research sought to combine and compare the two aspects of identity to examine their interactions. My fellow associates and I set up a series of studies to examine these interactions, which can be found in my dissertation, The Importance of Play. But the study I'm going to talk about in this presentation was solely focused on reducing the unique intersectional biases individuals with more than one underrepresented identity can face. In this study, participants played a single level of a video game with one of 4 player characters, and then evaluated one of 4 LinkedIn job applicant profiles. All the LinkedIn job applications were identical, save for the name and portrait of the applicant, which had both been pre-validated by previous research to be similarly attractive and representative of the races and genders they were meant to portray. So we examined the different gender and racial biases each of the applicants faced, and specifically looked at how identification with the Black female character affected biases against the Black female job applicant compared to the other character options. The participants answered several questions about the game, including some regarding their level of identification via embodiment, as well as other questions related to gameplay factors such as immersion, overall enjoyment, and identification via similarity to the character. This way, we were able to isolate embodied identification and examine how it alone impacted bias reduction. Once they played and evaluated the game, participants were asked to read a LinkedIn job application and evaluate it on a variety of factors. The main factors we focused on for the study were the applicant's level of perceived technical skill and overall likability. We found evidence of intersectional bias as the Black female applicant had to deal with both racial bias and gender bias against them, unlike their peers. However, we also found that intersectionality impacted embodied identification's effect on bias reduction, with high levels of embodied identification with the Black female character correlating with high ratings in both technical skill and likability for the Black female applicant. However, this came with a double-edged sword, because when participants played as a Black female character but reported low levels of identification, this significantly increased the bias against the Black female applicant, resulting in the worst scores in technical skill and likability out of all of the player character options. Still, our work was able to help us gain a fuller understanding of embodied identification in interactive experiences and their effects on biases. We provided evidence that you don't need a fully immersive VR setup or a game with a gripping narrative about learning to empathize with others to reduce biases. In fact, our work suggests you don't need all that much at all, as our game didn't feature any complex gameplay or deep story. We didn't even have voice acting or character facial expressions. It was a simple 2-minute cartoonish 2D side-scrolling puzzler. Naturally, more research is needed before we can make any definitive statements, but our work can be used as a starting point for developers and academics. If developers want to continue to use video games to promote positive social change, they should consider the complex intersectional identities of the people they wish to portray, and special focus should be placed on connecting the player to the character so that they see the character as an extension of themselves. As our research suggests that this unique connection between player and character can be enough to reduce real-world biases. Very quickly, I would like to thank my fellow researchers and co-authors. And if you would like to read our related paper on this study in full, simply look up the title, Using Intersectional Representation and Embodied Identification in Standard Video Gameplay to Reduce Societal Biases, and contact me via email at marie.jarrell@atnt.net.